Bang! Bang! In the void, a figure descended from the ether. It was Muyun Lan. He landed directly next to Muyun Shu. At the same time, Blind Tai also returned behind Yi Futian. In their battle, Muyun Lan realized that he couldn't overpower Blind Tai. After returning to the village as a blind man, he seemed even stronger than before, be it in perception, attack, or reaction speed. He couldn't see with his eyes, but he was more terrifying than when he could see. Muyun Lan lowered his head to look at Muyun Shu, who was beside him. His eyes were icy and gloomy. He left when Muyun Shu was still very young, so he almost had never seen him since. He and his younger brother communicated entirely through transmissions. As the absent elder brother, he thought he had not done much for him, so he doted on him and indulged his whims. But at this moment, Muyun Shu was being treated thusly. Older brother. Muyun Shu's eyes were glowing with blood as he regarded Muyun Lan. Those eyes made Muyun Lan feel enraged. Nanhai Qianxue also stopped fighting immediately and came to his side. Seeing Muyun Lan's expression, she knew just how badly he was feeling at this moment. Get up. Muyun Lan helped Muyun Shu up, then handed him over to the care of the Nanhai family. He raised his head to look at Yi Futian, his eyes filled with terrible murderous intent, not just toward Yi Futian, but to all the cultivators from Four Corner Village. This was not the case before, because after all, he was a cultivator from the village. Even if Four Corner Village did not want him and he lost in the fight, he still cared about their history together. However, his own feelings aside, the people in Four Corner Village did not seem to care about the past as much as he did. Everyone was following Yi Futian's lead and even abused his brother. In his eyes, Muyun Shu was nothing more than a teenager. He looked at Yi Futian, Blind Tai, and the others. He said, "From today onward, I, Muyun Lan, am done with Four Corner Village." Blind Tai, Fong Huan, and the others were moved slightly when they heard his words, but they did not have too much emotion. The Muyun family was expelled from Four Corner Village because of their own doings. The Muyun family was too ambitious and wanted to take control of the village and even entertain the possibility of joining forces with the Nanhai family, which was tantamount to betrayal. Muyun Shu was more akin to a jackal. Perhaps the people in Four Corner Village didn't resent Muyun Lan so much. But as for Muyun Shu, even people like Blind Tai wanted him dead. This little beast was not worth calling a human being. Therefore, the positions of both sides were destined. They could ever only stand on the opposite side as enemies. Buzz. An extremely radiant golden divine glory flashed and was gone. A shadow of a golden-winged rock appeared in the void, rushing directly at Yi Futian. At this moment, Yi Futian sensed that a terrifyingly sharp aura covered him. Be careful. Blind Tai's reaction was incredibly fast, and he appeared in front of Yi Futian in an instant. He raised his hand, and a hammer strike came down. The gigantic divine hammer and the terrifying incoming golden-winged rock converged. With a loud bang, the body of the golden-winged rock shattered, but a gust of wind was set off between heaven and earth. Muyun Lan did not continue to attack. He knew that they had lost in this confrontation. Although there were still those in the Nanhai family who had not taken action, it was of little use. Apart from him and Nanhai Qianxue, no one else could decide the outcome of the battle. What was more, the Renhuang of the Duan family had been watching from the sidelines. If they fought desperately at all costs, Muyun Shu and the others could not afford such a price either. Therefore, his gaze swept toward Yi Futian. There was an undisguised murderous intent in his eyes. But he turned around, walked towards the direction of the relic in front of him, and said, "You guys stay and take care of little Shu. The others will come with me." After that, he went straight inside. He knew that Yi Futian and the others would not touch Muyun Shu anymore. If they had wanted to kill him, they would have done it before. Yi Futian didn't dare. Many people were watching all this taking place. They didn't expect that the cultivators of the Nanhai family would be at a disadvantage, suppressed by Yi Futian. They asked for a truce, and Muyun Shu was brutally humiliated. If it weren't for Yi Futian's concern about Nanhai family, they probably would have already killed Muyun Shu on the spot. It would seem that this enchanting young talent still had a long way to go and had no capital to be as unruly as he had been. Let's go take a look too. Duan Qiong walked up and said in a low voice. Yi Futian nodded and headed inside as well. Previously, a beam of light had sailed across the firmament from the relic and was seen from far away. It would indicate that something had been discovered, possibly relics that had not been plundered. Now that the turmoil here had been settled temporarily, they ought to check it out. The cultivators from Nanhai family and Muyunlan had also entered, and they must have discovered something. Moreover, there were many other cultivators in the relic, and none of them had not come out yet. Yi Futian and the others walked directly into the relic and felt that they had stepped into the ruins of a magnificent ancient city. Many dilapidated buildings were thousands of meters high and awe-inspiring. There must have been many splendid and ancient buildings in their heyday, but now they lay in ruins. As they continued walking forward, an invisible coercion gradually spread out in front of them. Before they got any closer, they could feel its transcendent power. Yi Futian revealed a trace of surprise. The relic had been plundered throughout generations and should have already been depleted by all the lootings. All that could be taken had already been taken away. Now, after so many years, could there still be opportunities of the Great Path? If so, why hadn't it been discovered before? Yi Futian didn't think too much. They sensed the aura as they continued moving forward. It didn't take long for them to feel that they had entered the world of another space as if a wave of invisible power swept toward them. Be careful. This force is powerful. Blind Tai couldn't see the situation outside clearly, so he reminded Yi Futian as the situation here seemed a bit complicated. Yi Futian nodded. He had felt this power seem to become stronger as they moved further along until Yi Futian and the others came to the place where the dazzling divine light originated. They stopped and watched the scene ahead in shock. Not just them, but many people in this area had no time to even pay attention to the violent battles taking place outside, loitering in this space instead. In the front, what seemed to be the central area of the relic, there were 4 incredibly massive stone pillars surrounded the area. These 4 stone pillars were hefty and were far apart, surrounding a particular area. Terrifying brilliance dazzled in that area, and the 4 stone pillars were also bursting with dazzling light. This is an independent space, Yi Futian murmured. Yes, a small world. It is self-contained, Blind Tai said. Besides the Nanhai family, there were other cultivators from other major principalities. All of them were focusing their attention to the front, their expressions solemn, waiting with their guard up. Not long ago, someone tried to rush in by force and was slaughtered without a trace. The Zhongyuan continent was plundered long ago. Why are there any relics appearing now? Said Duan Qiong from the ancient royal family of Duan. He looked at the people around them and thought that these people should know how this relic appeared. Because a word was solved. At this moment, someone raised his head and spoke to Duan Qiong, who was in the void. Solved a word. Yi Futian looked at the speaker. Yes, one word. The man nodded and continued. One word contained an entire world. All these wonders are here because of the emergence of one word that materialized what we see before us now. Yi Futian felt unsettled when he heard the man's words. On the way over, he had heard from Duan Qiong, and the others talked about how terrifying the former master of Zhongyuan continent was. Now, he was hearing that the wonderment in front of them was nothing but a word. Previously, someone had discovered the word boundary in the ruins of the relic. After trying to communicate with it, the ancient word was cracked. Then, when the word disappeared, what is in front of us appeared. This world was hidden in the word boundary. A world hidden in one word. Yi Futian's heart was quite stricken with this knowledge. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 2156. Walked right through. Chapter 2156. Walked right through. Yi Futian and the other martial artists looked ahead. Within the 4 pillars that surrounded that space, they could roughly make out a magnificent sight. It was like an incomparably luxurious ancient palace, and it looked majestic. The word world sealed a little world within it, and this little world was very likely to have something to do with the previous owner of this place, or it could even have been left behind by the previous owner back then. Yi Futian wasn't the only one who thought this way, Everyone else thought the same way too. However, the four pillars that had seemingly formed a terrifying seal around the little world had made it impossible for all the cultivators to step in. Otherwise, all of them wouldn't have been waiting here for so long and would have gone in a long time ago. A Renhuang who came later tried, and an illusionary shadow created by divine consciousness flew straight towards the pillars of light in front. But once it came close to the pillars of light, it began to bend, and after it entered the area surrounded by the pillars, the shadow created by divine consciousness was bent so badly that it shattered. The shadow ceased to exist, which made that Renhuang let out a muffled cry, and he looked a little embarrassed. The great path here is not compatible with ours. If we try to enter by force, we will be destroyed, and our spiritual souls will also fall apart and turn to dust. We can't go at all, that Renhuang said in a slightly low voice. For many years, nobody had discovered anything on this continent, but their trip this time gave them a pleasant surprise. They had found this hidden little world, which could be hiding a huge secret. It might have even been left behind by the deities who once occupied this place. But now, they were all blocked from entering it, and none of them liked this feeling of being stuck outside very much. Yi Futian's gaze became extremely frightening and deepened greatly as he looked fixedly in front. He noticed that the space surrounded by the pillars was completely different from the world outside the pillars. It was as if this space was a void. If it didn't have a barrier around it that forbade anyone from entering it, most people probably couldn't even see that this space existed. This made his heart suddenly start palpitating because he had discovered an extraordinary phenomenon. The way this space existed was very similar to a place he had been to before. Four Corner Village. Back then, the space occupied by Four Corner Village was also impossible for ordinary people to see since it was an illusionary space. Only certain people on the day of sacrificial rites were able to see it and enter it. These people were all people with great fates, and to Yi Futian this so-called fate was really an ability to perceive. It was one's ability to perceive the path that was incompatible with this world. Such a discovery made Yi Futian recall many things. It seemed as though the legendary people of the past lived in a different world from the world he lived in today. That year, the heavenly path collapsed, and the world went through a major change, and that's how there was now a difference between this world and the original realm. Was there a link between the relics that the ones before him had left behind and the original realm? But of course, the real reason why Yi Futian's heart was palpitating was not any of these. It was his spirit. This spirit was a world tree, so it was able to develop a connection with divine items from the past, and it could even help him absorb from the land of demons and swallow the hearts of demons. This enabled him to overlap the two spaces of the Four Corner Village, which made it truly frightening. But what did all of this really mean? What exactly was a world tree? Was it really just a spirit that had been passed on? After cultivating to his current level, the things that Yi Futian understood could no longer be compared to what he understood in the past. Cultivators who had reached the Renhuang level could already remodel and change their own spirits. As their cultivation level increased, they could make their own divine wheel of the great path go through a complete transformation, which, in turn, influenced and changed their spirit. As it continued to evolve and be passed on, a real divine item could change one's fate against heaven's will, and so, it was only natural that the spirit could also be changed. He couldn't help but wonder if this world tree spirit was as simple as what he had inherited. It seemed like yet another opportunity to confirm his own spirit. This space here is a space of the great path that a legendary character of the past has left behind, and it is incompatible with the great path of space we have right now. This little world could be said to be a different world. Just then, someone spoke up as if he had also sensed something special about this space. The person who had spoken was Muyun Lan. He was a cultivator who had come from Four Corner Village and seemed to be more sensitive towards the aspect of cultivation. Also, his own cultivation level was very high, so he could sense that this space was different from the ordinary. This world here doesn't want outsiders to enter, so it has become a twisted and destructive space. So if one barges in by force, one would enter into a twisted great path of space? Said Nanhai Qianxue as she looked at Muyun Lan. That's right. Muyun Lan nodded. If one can get in by force and can withstand this amount of force, then there's a chance you can go in. The other possibility is that those gifted in the cultivation of perfect grade great path of space might be compatible and enter this space. Perhaps I could give it a try, said Muyunlan. His expression was grim as his eyes were fixed ahead. Nanhai Qianxue looked at him and said in a low voice, "It's too risky for you to do that." This was merely Muyunlan's conjecture, and even though Muyunlan's great path was perfect and could be compatible with the power from that space's great path, the space before them was left behind by someone great in the past. It would have reached the pinnacle of cultivation. So there was still a difference between the two. If Muyunlan barged in like that, it would be very dangerous. Before this, I didn't try because I wanted to see it more clearly. But I think I'm quite sure now, and I'm 80% confident of this. Even if I fail, I don't think I'd be trapped either, given my level of cultivation, said Muyunlan. He was determined to try barging in. Nanhai Qianxue knew Muyunlan's temperament and knew he was an extremely proud man. Since he wanted to try, then she wasn't going to be able to stop him. Be careful, said Nanhai Qianxue. Don't worry. Muyunlan nodded. After that, the divine light on his body glowed brilliantly as he unleashed the power of the great path of space to its maximum. His entire body was glowing with the divine light, and the golden rock wings behind him spread out as if it was able to break through the void at any time. If there were any sign that he might be trapped, he would give up immediately. The others all turned towards Muyunlan. This man was indeed a legendary character of their era, and his boldness and resolution were much higher than a normal person's. He actually wanted to barge in by force. They watched as Muyunlan walked towards the space surrounded by the pillars, flapped his wings, and entered the space. At that moment, they saw countless streams of lights flashing in the space as it enveloped his body. The rest of them watched Muyunlan with much anxiety. Would he be successful? The family members of the Nanhai family were the most anxious, especially Nanhai Qianxue. They saw that Muyunlan had run into some trouble inside, but he was still making progress. He seemed to have entered that space's dimension, and all the cultivators watching were surprised that they couldn't sense him anymore. His speed had slowed down as he moved along cautiously. Muyunlan seemed to be walking extremely slowly. Even though there was no sign of any great battle happening, many still felt like their hearts were in their mouth. Just then, they saw Muyunlan suddenly increase in speed as he rushed in like a bolt of lightning. In the next moment, his body had entered the world surrounded by the pillars. Muyunlan's body seemed to become especially small as he stood inside. It was as if the measurement standards of the world inside were different from the world outside. In that case, even though this space didn't look very large from the outside, it might actually be huge once one got in. He's gone in. Many of them felt their hearts tremble. Muyunlan had been able to go in, but it was hard for the rest of them to do so. It was already rare to find a perfect grade great path cultivator in the first place, and someone who had perfected the great path of space was even rarer. Even the top factions of power might not find many among themselves. Muyunlan has gone in. I suppose he will become enlightened again, said one of them. Just then, they saw another person walk forward, which caused a strange look to appear on many of their faces, especially on the cultivators from the Nanhai family. The person walking towards the front was none other than Yi Futian. Nanhai Qing had a nasty look in his eyes. Did this fellow want to enter the space too? Even though his great path was perfect, it was still not easy to barge in. But he also hoped that Yi Futian would give it a shot, and the best would be if he died inside as well. Yi Futian, murmured someone softly. Would he be able to go in? It was probably going to be difficult and rather risky. But Yi Futian stood before the pillars and released small amounts of aura towards the light in between the pillars. In no time, the power of his great path flowed continuously into the space and merged with the great path of space inside. After that, everyone looked on in shock as Yi Futian walked right in without running into any obstruction. He just walked right through and into the space in the middle of the pillars. All the cultivators watching felt their eyes widen and their mouths fell open. How was this even possible? How did Yi Futian do this? Even though his great path was perfect, his cultivation level was low, and it was way off from Muyunlan's level. How did he manage to go in with such ease? Even Nan Haiqing, who had been hoping to watch Yi Futian die a horrible death moments ago, suddenly kept that thought away as he witnessed with his own eyes how Yi Futian had just walked right across this area and entered the space. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Many of them felt that this was simply ridiculous. Never mind the rest of them, even Duan Qiong stared with his eyes and mouth wide open as he watched Yi Futian saunter into the space. That seemed a little too easy, didn't it? Many of them felt that this was simply ridiculous. Never mind the rest of them, even Duan Qiong stared with his eyes and mouth wide open as he watched Yi Futian saunter into the space. That seemed a little too easy, didn't it? Even though Muyunlan had made it before Yi Futian did, Muyunlan ran into some difficulties and seemed to have managed to enter the space after being very cautious. But Yi Futian had just walked right in as if this space was no different from the outside world. This scene was challenging for anybody to explain. Even though this fellow is also gifted in great path of space, he's made the process look a little too simple, said someone incredulously. Even I want to give it a shot now, grumbled another. Indeed, after watching Yi Futian walk in so easily, many of them felt tempted to try. But it didn't take long for someone to learn his lesson. If he hadn't reacted quickly enough, he might have died on the spot. This really puzzled a lot of people. Why was Yi Futian able to do this so easily, but they ended up nearly losing their lives from merely trying? Only the ones who were close to Yi Futian thought this to be normal. They didn't look surprised at all, as if this was to be expected. He and Muyunlan have both gone in. Would the two of them end up fighting? Someone suddenly asked in a low voice. The others realized all of a sudden that Yi Futian and Muyunlan had quite the feud, and they had gotten into a really violent fight outside not too long ago. And now, Yi Futian had gone in after Muyunlan. Wasn't he asking to get beaten up again? In the earlier fight, the Nanhai family and Muyunlan didn't gain the upper hand and were actually kept at bay, so Muyunlan might not actually dare to do anything to Yi Futian. Otherwise, nobody knows what would happen in the outside world, replied another. Many of them agreed. Anybody who witnessed the fight outside earlier knew very well that Yi Futian and the people of Four Corner Village had definitely gained the upper hand in that fight. If Muyunlan tried to kill Yi Futian in there, nobody out here would be able to stop Blind Tai. Yi Futian understood this very well too. After he entered the space, he felt like he had come to a completely different world. Looking in from outside and being inside this world itself gave him a very different feeling altogether. He now felt that he had truly come to a completely different space world. It was very real, and it was neither an elusive realm nor a void space. It was a place a legendary character of the past used for cultivation. All the buildings in this place were pure white and seemed to have been carved out of white jade. White jade pillars were tall enough to reach the sky as they held this place up and extended into the clouds. The beautiful sight before him gave him the feeling that he was now in a heavenly palace. Even the Donghua Palace of the Donghua Domain Chief's manor wasn't this majestic. This made Yi Futian believe that this was a place where some godlike person must have cultivated. The ruler of the Zhongyan continent possibly sealed off the place where he cultivated so that it would not be destroyed and would survive till today. A solemnness rose in his heart as Yi Futian continued to walk ahead. But someone quietly stood in front of him and turned around to look at him. It was Muyunlan who had come in earlier. He didn't expect Yi Futian to have come in after him. But even though he saw that Yi Futian had made it in here, there was no dramatic change in his gaze. He just looked at Yi Futian with some frostiness as he said in a distant tone of voice, "If I don't tell you to move, you shall stand there and not move." With that, he started walking forward. His voice had an authority that was not to be questioned, as if he had given Yi Futian the command to stand there, and he was not allowed to move. Yi Futian frowned. He knew that Muyunlan wouldn't dare to do anything to him, but he didn't expect Muyunlan's personality to be so audacious. He had come in here, but Muyunlan didn't allow him to move. Yi Futian picked his feet up and started moving forward as well. But the moment he took one step out, Muyunlan stopped walking as well. Beams of gold divine light that carried the power of the great path emanated out from him. All of a sudden, a golden figure appeared in front of Yi Futian. In an instant, the terrifying illusion of a golden-winged rock appeared from nowhere and came down murderously towards him. Its incredible pair of wings flapped and tore through the air as it made its way towards Yi Futian. Yi Futian shifted himself instantly and disappeared from where he was standing earlier to appear in a different place. But he soon realized that in the blink of an eye, several more illusions of golden-winged rocks had appeared before him. Each one seemed so real as they carried a ferocious aura while coming at him at the same time. They seemed to have drowned out the space here, and he had nowhere to escape to. At that moment, a gargantuan illusion of a peacock appeared behind Yi Futian. It gave off countless beams of light from its body and attacked all the illusions of the golden-winged rocks. But they were unable to hold up against the attack power of the golden-winged rocks. Yi Futian thrust his long spear outwards, only to see a golden-winged rock use its sharp claws to block the attack. It had actually used its razor-sharp claws to grab hold of the long spear as the other illusions continued to attack from other directions. The illusion of the peacock unleashed a glaring amount of divine light. It was as if it had come out from countless pairs of eyes at the same time, but it was still unable to fend off the force coming towards it that seemed to be able to blot out the sky. Bam! With a loud blast, Yi Futian flew out from the impact and was sent far into the distance. At that moment, all the illusions disappeared as they merged into one and returned to Muyunlan's body. Those jealous-looking eyes were filled with cold-blooded and murderous thoughts. If not for the fact that he couldn't kill Yi Futian now, he would have done it right now and gotten rid of this man. The power of level 8. The aura on Yi Futian trembled as he looked up at Muyunlan in front of him. Muyunlan was at Renhuang level 8 perfect grade great path, and he was reaching its peak already, so he was practically invincible, while Yi Futian's level was too far from his after all. Dealing with an ordinary level 8 Renhuang was no problem to him, and he would even have the upper hand. Still, Muyunlan was a compelling character from Four Corner Village and had experienced enlightenment. It was really way too difficult for him at level 5 to defeat Muyunlan. Everyone looking in from outside narrowed their eyes as they watched the battle. Muyunlan had seriously tried to attack Yi Futian, but Muyunlan didn't seem like he intended to really kill Yi Futian. There were too many things he had to consider, so he didn't dare to go too far. However, from what they could see, it looked like Muyunlan was purposely trying to stop Yi Futian from discovering any secrets within that space. Blind Tai couldn't see what was going on inside, and he couldn't sense it either, but his ears twitched, and he could overhear the discussions among the rest of the people. His expression turned cold as he started walking towards where the cultivators from the Nanhai family were standing. Nanhai Qing and the rest immediately tensed up and were worried that Blind Tai was here to take revenge. "Do not make me repeat myself," said Muyunlan aggressively before continuing to walk on. It was as if he had been standing there without moving throughout the attack. "But I want to understand a level 8 Golden Rock Heaven Slayer technique." Yi Futian ignored whatever Muyunlan said and continued walking forward. The blasts of Great Path resounded from his body as countless beams of divine light shot out from within his body. His whole body was filled with exuberant energy. Even though he was not at a level able to fight Muyunlan, who was at level 8 perfect grade Great Path, he didn't mind making use of Muyunlan to hone his fighting abilities. Before leaving the Donghua domain, he had heard that the most talented and powerful person of the domain, Ninghua, had already reached level 8. Regardless of whether it was Ninghua or Muyunlan, these were all rivals that he would eventually need to face in the future. So wasn't a chance to hone and perfect his skills a really rare chance? A tremendous amount of pressure filled the space. Yi Futian's body served as the center of this pressure, and a starry dimension with innumerable stars surrounded him. A bright white moon hung high in the sky as it emanated a chilling air, causing the space to nearly freeze over. Muyunlan's body was suspended in the air as the incredibly glorious picture of the domineering golden peng bird appeared on his body. His gaze swept towards Yi Futian and his murderous intentions intensified, but he tried his best to hold himself back. A golden-winged rock flew out ferociously like a beam of light as it seemed to become a beautiful sword. This golden sword-like bird tore through the air and flew murderously towards Futian. Many more golden-winged rocks surrounded it as if they were determined to kill everything in their way. Futian shifted his consciousness, and the divine light from the frosty moon shone down on the legendary birds and affected their speed but was unable to destroy them. At the same time, he raised a hand and slammed it down, causing all the stars to instantly rain down towards the birds like divine monuments coming down from the sky. Bam, bam, bam. It shattered all the force that it landed on, and even though the golden rocks continued to fly towards Futian, their strength had been greatly diminished. Many doors of space appeared in front of Futian and made their way towards those sword-like birds. The divine swords created by the golden-winged rocks broke through the doors and shattered them, but just then, a long spear attacked them, blocking the swords and blocking the attack. But in the same instant, a strong wind began to howl as an enormous bird smashed down from the sky as it aimed straight for Futian. The illusion of a peacock behind Futian unleashed an incredibly gorgeous light of the demon god from itself. The incomparably huge peacock shot into the sky as it became one with the divine light to collide with the bird that was smashing down. Futian was sent flying out again from the impact, and he gave a muffled cry. The blood force within his body roiled, but he caught his breath again almost instantly. He held a long spear in his hands and looked towards Muyanlan. An eagerness to fight blazed in those eyes. Muyanlan stared at Futian and could sense that eagerness to engage in battle from Futian's body. He could sense that Futian was making use of him to train himself up, and he knew that his threats didn't mean anything to Futian at all. They both knew very well that he didn't dare to do anything to Futian, so Futian ended up using his attacks to hone his fighting ability instead. When he realized this, Muyanlan's expression darkened even further, and his murderous thoughts intensified greatly. But he had to think about the situation outside. Terrifying beams of divine light came down, and he wished he could kill Futian on the spot. But he couldn't do that. Muyanlan spun around and left. He continued walking deeper into the space and didn't bother stopping Futian anymore. He knew there was no point in doing that, and he would only serve to benefit Futian instead. Futian felt that it was such a pity. It was so hard to find a rival at this level. An ordinary level 9 character wasn't his match either. But Muyanlan had realized what Futian was trying to do, so he decided to just leave. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 2158. The World Has No Path. Chapter 2158. The World Has No Path. Muyanlan was in front, and Futian was in the back. The two of them walked on at the same time and passed many pillars that were so tall that they reached the clouds. Divine consciousness didn't work in this place, so they had to use their eyes to observe everything. They could vaguely sense a terrifying form of pressure in front, so they lifted their heads to look into the distance. They could make out a flight of stairs that extended high up towards the sky, and there were even more majestic-looking golden pillars at the top of the stairs. They sparkled brightly. It was as if there was something even more frightening to behold in that place. "What's over there?" thought both of them in their hearts. Muyanlan had already started walking briskly towards the stairs. He didn't walk too quickly, but each step was strong and steady. Every step he took created a booming sound, making one feel a tremendous amount of pressure. This authoritative pressure wasn't something that he unleashed on purpose. It was a natural sort of formidability that made his expression grim as he fixed his gaze in front. His expression was bleak because he could sense that this series of chance encounters might really have led them to find an actual relic of the past, and it could really be something left behind by a truly incredible person of the past. Muyanlan had been willing to marry into the Nanhai family to become their son-in-law, not only for the sake of his cultivation. He used to be from the village and knew very little about anything else. His knowledge of the world outside was blurry and as good as none. He only knew about cultivation and his wish to go out and explore the world. After wandering out there for several years, his knowledge expanded. But it was only after he met Nanhai Qianxue and came to the Nanhai family that he found out about the great secrets of ancient times. That was when he realized that there were still so many astonishing secrets to be uncovered and many stories that had been buried in the long river of history. And since he was facing what could be the relic of a godlike character, he became very solemn, and his heart was tumultuous. The gods of ancient times were those who dared to fight the heavens and were heaven-defying existences themselves. This sort of undefeatable boldness was something that triggered his ambition. He wished he had been born in that era to have competed with the heavenly palace. Yi Futian looked equally solemn. But unlike Muyunlan, he was still in the process of searching while cultivating. He was searching for the secret of his own past, he was searching for the truth behind the world tree, and of course, he wanted to know what this world really was like. There were many things that he felt like he had come into contact with but wasn't able to see clearly. But as his cultivation level continued to rise, he was beginning to inch toward the truth slowly. When he reached the stairs, he also felt this odd authoritative pressure coming from it. This pressure was ancient and solemn and wasn't brought here by some other power. It seemed like the purest form of might. It had no form or shape, but it weighed heavily on him and made him feel like he was suffocating. Yi Futian started walking up the stairs. His body was surrounded by the glow of the divine light of Great Path as if he was a divine being himself, but the divine light of Great Path didn't seem as pretty or eye-catching in this place. On the contrary, it seemed somewhat dim, as if that mighty pressure had kept everything under its control, which caused Yi Futian to feel that the power he had didn't seem to do any wonders for him, and he had to rely on his own body to endure everything that came his way. "What's up there?" wondered Yi Futian. His heart was immensely calm. He looked up into the sky, and there was some anticipation in his eyes. But there was no way he could increase his speed, and he had no choice but to go up one step at a time. In front of him, Muyunlan had stopped walking, and his breathing seemed to have quickened. He hadn't released any aura and did not unleash any of his great path power. It was clear that Muyunlan had gone through the same thing as Yi Futian. He had also realized that the powers he had were useless because this authoritative pressure had no regard for any great path power. It was a pressure that weighed on one's spirit. But after a few moments, he continued walking up. Yi Futian followed behind him. His breathing started to quicken as well. He didn't stop and began to close the gap between himself and Muyunlan. The two of them continued to walk higher and higher up the stairs. When Muyunlan stopped again, he was left with only the last 3 steps. He took a deep breath, then picked up his feet and went up again. He stood at the top of the stairs, and for one moment, Muyunlan's gaze froze. He stood where he was without budging an inch and just stared straight ahead. Yi Futian figured that Muyunlan must have seen something. He continued walking up from behind Muyunlan, finally reaching the top and stood on the landing. After that, his gaze was also frozen like Muyunlan's, and he, too, stood there without moving as he stared at what was in front of him. And so, the people outside witnessed a bizarre scene before them. These two enemies were actually standing side by side, quietly looking ahead. The people outside couldn't see exactly what was there and could only see an extremely bright ball of light. What did they see? Everyone's hearts trembled as a strong sense of curiosity overwhelmed them. These two were archenemies. What could they have seen that would make them stand there without moving the slightest bit? Many of them wished they could also go in to see what was there. But until now, the two of them were the only ones able to enter the space. Nobody else had been able to go in. If they wanted to know what the two of them had seen, they had to wait for them to come back out. At the same time, inside the space, Muyunlan and Yi Futian were faced with a glaring flash of golden divine light. The gleaming diving light was so glaring that their eyes hurt. This place seemed to have been a place where one cultivated. Characters were carved into the pillars that seemed to reach the sky, and they were all over the floor as well. It looked like a gigantic formation, and it also resembled an altar. But right in the middle of this area, Muyunlan and Yi Futian saw a golden coffin. That glorious golden divine light emanated from this golden coffin, and it hurt their eyes to look upon it. The mighty pressure was coming from this coffin as well, and it made both of them pant heavily. Even though they were powerful, they felt like their legs were about to give way. That was how frightening the pressure was. In this place, it seemed like none of the great path power was of any use. The might that shone on them had eliminated all the power they had. It's those words. Muyun Lan and Yi Futian looked towards the words written on the pillars. 5 pillars had 5 different words on them: the world, has, no, and path. The world has no path. Muyun Lan murmured to himself. Just when he was about to unleash the great path aura within him, it was instantly distinguished. For as long as the divine light of those ancient words shone down on him, the great path did not exist. No path existed in this space. The world has no path. Yi Futian was equally shaken as he murmured these 5 words to himself. What did they mean? What was the path here referring to? The world had no path? Then what was the power that they had all been cultivating? If this sort of power existed, then why did it disappear completely in this space? Why wasn't it able to exist in this space? Muyun Lan and Yi Futian's hearts were both filled with questions as they looked towards that coffin. Yi Futian stepped out, which caused the floor to resonate loudly. Even though his movement was extremely limited within this space, he still took that step out anyway. The strength of the world tree within his body slowly spread through the rest of his body, which filled his body with strength. Muyun Lan's expression froze when he noticed Yi Futian's movement. He tried to take a step forward only to find that he wasn't able to. It was already not easy for him to remain standing under this tremendous pressure. But Yi Futian was actually able to continue walking. Did that mean he wasn't as powerful as Yi Futian? Muyun Lan was a proud man by nature, so even though Yi Futian had made a name for himself recently and was incredibly gifted, he didn't think that he would be any less than Yi Futian. But after they had both entered this relic and come here, he didn't have any more strength to keep walking, while Yi Futian could continue walking ahead. This was a terrible blow to Muyun Lan's pride. The great path resonated within his body, and it seemed like divine light was flickering behind him as he forced himself to take a step forward. But all of this was quickly extinguished by that formless divine light from the coffin. Muyun Lan made a muffled noise as blood dribbled from his lips, but he still insisted on taking this step forward. He looked towards the front to see that Yi Futian was still walking ahead. He was walking very slowly, but he had already made 3 steps forward. Yi Futian seemed to have sensed Muyun Lan's movement, so he turned back to glance at Muyun Lan to see that Muyun Lan was still trying to move forward despite bleeding from the mouth and nose. If he went on like this, he might end up bleeding from even more places. This man was naturally proud and was one who refused to give up or give in. But this obstinance wasn't always a good thing. Yi Futian had taken more steps forward only because the world tree wasn't affected by the divine light and had given him more strength. Otherwise, he would have remained where he was. The path of cultivation is not an easy one. Don't go down the path of destruction, said Yi Futian in a low voice. Muyun Lan looked at him. Was Yi Futian advising him now? Was he mocking him? Or was he laughing at his misfortune? If you die like this, then I'd have one rival less. It's better if you leave yourself alive for me to kill, continued Yi Futian. After that, he didn't care about him anymore and took yet another step forward. Muyun Lan was bleeding from more places now, so he ended up giving up. He moved his body backward to stand at the edge of the staircase once again and didn't dare to try moving forward anymore. Meanwhile, Yi Futian had already reached the coffin. The glaring rays of light made it hard for him to open his eyes, so he used a hand to block some of it. He looked towards the inside of the coffin, and his heart pounded wildly as his hand froze. He had just taken one look, and Yi Futian let out a tragic-sounding yelp as his body was sent flying right out. He crashed into one of the pillars and vomited a mouthful of fresh blood. Blood was also seeping out from his eyes, and he looked awful. Muyun Lan felt his own heart pound wildly when he saw this. He stared straight at that coffin, then looked towards Yi Futian. He watched as Yi Futian put a hand over his eyes, and it was dyed red by blood. The energy from the world tree within his body extended to his eyes. He slowly moved his hand away, and the blood had all dried up. His eyes opened again to look towards the coffin. What's there? Muyun Lan couldn't help but ask Yi Futian even though he knew Yi Futian was injured. Yi Futian's gaze looked back at where Muyun Lan was standing. Muyun Lan looked back at him as if he was waiting for a response from Yi Futian. What was inside this coffin? At that moment, Muyunlan felt his heart pound wildly on its own accord. But even though Yi Futian wanted to say something, he didn't say anything in the end. His heart was also pounding equally wildly. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. What on earth is it? Muyunlan asked again since Yi Futian didn't answer. His eyes glowed with curiosity. The thing almost blinded Yi Futian and left him open-mouthed. What could it possibly be? What on earth is it? Muyunlan asked again since Yi Futian didn't answer. His eyes glowed with curiosity. The thing almost blinded Yi Futian and left him open-mouthed. What could it possibly be? What was hidden inside of a divine casket that was sealed in the mysterious site of relics of ancient gods? Was it a body? Could it be the remains of ancient gods if it was indeed a body? Sacred remains. Yi Futian still didn't answer Muyunlan's question. It was not that he didn't want to reply, but that he couldn't tell what it was or to put it into words. Was it a corpse? He had trouble describing it clearly. While he still felt staggered and disconcerted at this moment, he was also filled with wonder and a strong urge to explore. His eyes, which had recovered from temporary blindness, were glued to the divine casket. Beams of divine light illuminated his body. It was imperial glory instead of the ordinary divine light of the great path. His eyes reflected the dazzling light and shone brilliantly as if they were eyes of God. He stepped forward again, walking over to the divine casket. He wanted to give it another try to identify the thing in the casket. He was almost blinded just now for taking a brief look. Any other cultivator at the same level would have lost his sight already. Muyunlan clenched his fists and stared at Yi Futian without blinking. This jerk wouldn't tell him what was inside the casket. Muyunlan exerted himself to move a step forward, attempting to take a look himself. Even if you managed to get here, you probably would be blinded after one quick look. Do you really want to try? A cold voice said to Muyunlan. Muyunlan dropped the idea right away. He stood frozen to the ground and was at a loss for words. He certainly had been performing worse than Yi Futian, even though he was unwilling to admit it. He saw what kind of price Yi Futian paid to look inside the casket, and he knew he was very likely to be blinded if he tried it himself. Of course, Muyunlan noticed how Yi Futian was glowing with the imperial glory as well. Yi Futian was fortunate enough to obtain the will of the great emperor during a serendipitous encounter. Perhaps it was why he was better than Muyunlan and was confident enough to try again. Yi Futian walked extremely slowly. Each of his footsteps was heavy. It was as if he was carrying tons of weight. He paused for a second when he reached the divine casket. His eyes already turned into a rich and bright golden color as though they were brightened by the divine light. Yi Futian approached the divine casket one more time to look inside. In an instant, countless rays of divine light pierced into Yi Futian's eyes. He felt excruciating pain in his eyes, and even his spiritual soul was shaken violently. The blinding golden divine light seemed to be an endless flow of runes. Each rune was left by the ancient gods and contained enigmatic power. More remarkably, the countless runes all seemed to be coming from a body, which was essentially made up of golden runes. It was a corpse indeed. The sacred remains. However, the dazzling and magnificent sacred remains didn't have blood, flesh, or bones. Even if a god died, his body would never decompose, and his blood wouldn't dry out either. Moreover, he could resurrect himself even if he only had one drop of blood or one patch of skin left. Yi Futian couldn't imagine what gods were capable of, but at least they would have bodies that could last forever. That being said, the sacred remains in front of him were composed of innumerable runes. It was a spectacular sight. Yi Futian felt a strong, sharp pain in his eyes. He let out an agonized yelp and fell back. 2 streams of blood trickled from his eyes and made him look miserable. Even though he was well prepared this time, Yi Futian couldn't endure the pain for more than a split second. The runes that formed the remains thrust into his eyes and head. He couldn't persevere in the face of this kind of power. Was this developed after a god's death? Yi Futian was astounded even though this was not the first sacred remains that he saw. In the past, he had encountered the divine heart of the peacock left by the peacock demon god. What did the sacred remains mean this time? At the moment, this area in the outer realms was surrounded by a lot of cultivators. They were all eager to know what was going on inside. Why did Muyunlan stop moving forward? What happened to him? Yi Futian, as opposed to Muyunlan, walked into the area that couldn't be discerned. Did it mean that Yi Futian was doing better than Muyunlan in the relic? All of a sudden, everyone sensed the formidable authority of heaven. Many of them raised their heads to look in the direction of the source of the terrifying energy. They immediately saw a person appear in the sky above them. It was an old man with an ethereal quality. His long, white beard was flowing in the wind, making him look like a deity. Who is that? Everyone's heart was pounding with excitement and anticipation. The cultivators from the Nanhai family bowed to the old man and said, "Greetings to the clan leader." The clan leader of the Nanhai family was here. The crowd was almost blown away. No one expected to see master cultivators here, let alone the preeminent leader of the Nanhai family. He arrived so quickly. It seemed that the cultivators from the Nanhai family informed him of the situation, which attracted him here at once. The clan leader of the Nanhai family gazed at the area below with a solemn expression. He asked, "How was this discovered?" After years of raiding and plundering, they thought there was no valuable relic left in the Zhongyuan continent. This was why it was shocking for them to see the situation here. This meant that they missed one of the most important relics on this continent. This area came into sight after someone solved the mystery by chance, a person replied. The clan leader of the Nanhai family was lost for words. Was it that simple? Nevertheless, it was meaningless to inquire about the details or regret the past. Instead, he focused on the present and watched the area intently. Just when he was about to make a move, another burst of fierce energy arrived. A voice rang out in midair. I was wondering what Brother Nanhai was rushing for. It turns out that there is God's relic on the Zhongyuan continent. Before the voice faded, another master cultivator came into view. Brother Nanhai, it's quite selfish of you to not share the news with us. A succession of master cultivators showed up, one of whom looked like a majestic ruler in his lavish imperial robe. The sovereign of the Shangyu deity nation. It appeared that most of the mighty figures of the upper third heaven had arrived. They all went to the Shangqing continent at the request of the domain chief's manor. However, the leaders of the Nanhai family and the Yin family left abruptly, which caught the attention of other master cultivators. They followed them here, which led to what happened just now. The crowd was electrified to see the most prominent cultivators arriving one after another. The domain chief's manor invited them over. Yet, who would have thought that they all gathered here in the Zhongyuan continent? Everyone could feel a great force of intense pressure pressing down over their bodies because of these mighty figures' presence. However, they were only staring at the area below while unleashing terrifying energy to surround the pillars. Subsequently, the crowd was hit by a strong yet invisible wave. It felt like a surreal spatial storm to the cultivators nearby. Back off. A voice boomed in the void. The cultivators immediately pulled back. But the invisible undulation of energy grew more intense. It turned into a gale and was transformed into a real spatial storm. A wicked storm struck again, and blinding light flooded the space. At this moment, all of the wrecked buildings were once again smashed to smithereens, dust clouds blowing in the wind. After the storm finally subsided, the crowd standing far away suddenly realized that the area had changed. To everyone's astonishment, numerous stone pillars soared into the clouds as if they were part of a splendid divine palace. This is what's inside. Many people felt their hearts pounding rapidly. Was the divine palace inside the relic moved out by the master cultivators by force? Yi Futian and Muyunlan naturally sensed the change as well. They raised their heads to look at the people hovering in the air. Although he had never met any of them, Yi Futian knew that they were mighty figures from various top forces. Old Ma. Yi Futian recognized Old Ma, who was behind the crowd. Old Ma followed other people here too. Father-in-law, Muyun Lan shouted at the clan leader of the Nanhai family. The man nodded and responded, Muyun Lan, pull back for now. Muyun Lan nodded slightly. There was no point for him to stay now that the master cultivators had arrived. Before he made a quick exit, he darted a glance at Yi Futian. Yi Futian was quietly withdrawing from the area. Even so, many master cultivators in the air noticed him. They stared at him for a while, surprised that he could approach the divine casket. In fact, the master cultivators were also astounded to see that it was a divine casket. As soon as they focused their attention on the inside of the divine casket, several of them closed their eyes. Others shrieked and immediately teleported away, then reappeared in the sky extremely far away. What is that? A voice echoed through the area. Even the clan leader of the Nanhai family drew back without looking at the casket. His eyes closed tightly. The spectators were stunned by their reaction. What on earth was inside the dazzling divine casket? Even the most powerful cultivators recoiled in horror. There was no doubt that it was something left by the ancient gods. A cultivator from the Nanhai family rose into the air, trying to sneak a peek. But the clan leader bellowed, "Back off. You can't look at it." Startled, the man stopped right away. He understood that he had to curb his curiosity when he saw the expression on the clan leader's face. He couldn't even cast a brief look at the divine casket. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The master cultivators stood in different directions and seemed extremely cautious. Even people as powerful as them didn't dare to look. One could well imagine what kind of horrific thing was lying inside the divine casket. The master cultivators stood in different directions and seemed extremely cautious. Even people as powerful as them didn't dare to look. One could well imagine what kind of horrific thing was lying inside the divine casket. Is it him? Someone asked the clan leader of the Nanhai family. He was awfully afraid and didn't have the courage to look himself. Yes, the clan leader of the Nanhai family nodded and replied. I'm surprised that the remains of an ancient legend are preserved till today, the person exclaimed. Father-in-law, whose body was it? Muyun Lan asked. It turned out that his guess was right. It was sacred remains indeed. However, how could a corpse contain so much terrifying power that even the master cultivators had to stay away? If I'm correct, this should be Xinjia the Great Emperor, the clan leader of the Nanhai family said in a low and solemn voice. Even he felt deep respect and admiration for such a legendary figure. The majority of the world had never heard about Xinjia the Great Emperor. Only the master cultivators vaguely knew something about him. It was arcane history from ancient times. Ordinary cultivators outside of the most influential families couldn't possibly obtain such information. On top of that, even the families that rose to prominence in recent years didn't have chances to access the secret stories from ancient times. It had to be aristocratic families with a long lineage. Xinjia the Great Emperor who didn't believe in the heavenly path? Muyun Lan was taken aback. He had learned about the little-known stories of many mighty figures in ancient times since he married into the Nanhai family. Many supreme cultivators achieved spectacular feats and left a mark in the history of time. Xinjia the Great Emperor was one of them. He didn't worship the heavenly path and dared to challenge the mainstream belief. He once carved the words, heaven and earth, to demonstrate unmatched confidence and firm resolve to confront heaven. He didn't believe in the heavenly path. Yi Futian silently repeated Muyun Lan's words. Astonished, he looked at the runes on the stone pillars. This supreme cultivator in ancient times didn't believe in the heavenly path and built these stone pillars to destroy the established great path. What kind of bold vision and elevated state of mind he had. Yi Futian could hardly imagine. What on earth was the highest level of cultivation? He once heard that the heavenly path collapsed because it was broken during the Great War from the distant past. Now he couldn't help but wonder if the heavenly path came apart because there were too many marvelous cultivators competing against heaven at that time. It would be a shocking history if his speculation were true. Nevertheless, no one knew what exactly happened in the past. At least Yi Futian couldn't figure it out yet. He had cultivated for such a long time and thought that he had acquired plenty of knowledge. Nowadays, however, it was becoming clear to him that there were much more that he didn't know. He felt like an ignorant child. Now, almost all the master cultivators in the Shangqing domain were daunted by a corpse of an ancient legend. They couldn't even take a brief look without undergoing tremendous pressure and risk. Who could come near the sacred remains? At this moment, another person stepped forward and looked down into the divine casket. It was the overlord of the Shangyu deity nation. His body was releasing terrifying energy, and his eyes glowed with the divine light. His gaze penetrated the space and focused on the sacred remains directly. Nonetheless, even with his dominant power and thorough preparation, he only held on for a short moment before shifting his eyes away. Although he managed to look at the sacred remains for a longer time than the clan leader of the Nanhai family did, it didn't mean that he was stronger than him. He was more prepared. It's undoubtedly Xinjia, the great emperor, the overlord of the Shangyu deity nation said. Rumor has it that Xinjia, the great emperor, was able to transform the great emperor into runes. His physical body was invincible and imperishable as a result of long time and high-level cultivation. I would have never thought that I could see his sacred remains so many years later. Even though Xinjia, the great emperor, has already passed on, his body here is probably still in a class of its own. His remarks tantalized many people. Overlord Shangyu had a point. Anyone who could control the sacred remains would be unrivaled in the divine prefecture. Apart from Donghuang, the great emperor, who could prevail over the sacred remains of Xinjia, the great emperor of ancient times. Although the sacred remains could be used as the ultimate weapon, ordinary folks could barely take a look, let alone control it. Notwithstanding, the lack of ability didn't stop people from fantasizing about it. Who didn't want to become the unparalleled fighter in the world? All of a sudden, the wind started to gust, and the clouds rolled in. Another person arrived while carrying intimidating power with him. The crowd looked up at the sky. The master cultivators already realized who just turned up. It seemed that it would be difficult for them to seize hold of the sacred remains for themselves now. I invited all of you to come to the Shangqing continent. Yet it looks like you are all gathered here instead. The crowd heard his voice before seeing his face. Everyone raised their heads and saw a middle-aged man emerging in the sky. His hair was completely gray even though he seemed to be only 40 years old. Judging by his handsome face and majestic bearing, it was not hard for people to guess his identity. He was the domain chief of the Shangqing domain. Domain chief, you're here too. The master cultivators greeted him one after another. The chief nodded and looked in the direction of the divine casket. He said, "Who would have thought that there are sacred remains hidden in a relic on the Zhongyuan continent in the Shangqing domain? We would have turned the Zhongyuan continent upside down if we knew that the body of Xinjia, the great emperor, still existed. The top forces surely would do their utmost to thoroughly search through the Zhongyuan continent if they had known before. However, things would become tricky now that the domain chief had personally come. Everyone was conceiving all sorts of sinister plots in their heads before the chief's arrival. But it would be even harder for them to get their hands on the sacred remains now. The domain chief shot a glance at the divine casket and said, "It's Xinjia, the great emperor indeed." He bowed slightly to the divine casket below to show his respect for the ancient legend. Then he scanned the crowd and announced, "Let's head to the Shangqing continent together since you are all here. I will bring the divine casket to the domain chief's manor and report to the Donghuang imperial palace later." Everyone's heart sunk upon hearing his decision. The domain chief's plan was indisputable. The others might be able to question him if he only said to bring the casket back to the domain chief's manor. But he specifically added that he would report it to the Donghuang imperial palace later, which meant that he would only hold the divine casket temporarily for safekeeping. Who could challenge his decision after he stated his intention of waiting for Donghuang the great emperor's instruction? That being said, it was unclear how long he planned to keep the divine casket in the domain chief's manor before reporting to the Donghuang imperial palace. He might hold on to it for a while. Either way, his argument was watertight. It's extremely rare to encounter the sacred remains of the great emperor in early ancient times. Domain chief, after you bring the casket back to the Shangqing continent, can we study it together for a while to make some progress in cultivation? the overlord Shang Yu suggested. They had to compromise at this point for a chance to study the sacred remains. At the very least, they couldn't let the domain chief hog it for himself. No problem, of course. Any cultivator would be eager to study such a divine body from the early ancient times. The domain chief nodded and said, "I understand what you mean." "Thank you, domain chief." Everyone nodded in agreement. It would be inappropriate for them to push further at this point. Nonetheless, none of them was satisfied with the arrangement. The domain chief settled the issue of jurisdiction over the sacred remains moments after his arrival. The last word belonged to the most powerful person for sure. No one cared or inquired about the person who discovered the relic in the first place, as if it didn't matter at all. Of course, it was only a trivial detail indeed. "Let's go back to the Shangqing continent together since we're all here," the domain chief said. Then he turned his eyes to the area below. With a deafening sound, the earth quaked violently. Cracks appeared one by one as though the ground was about to be split open. The intense divine light of the Great Path illuminated the area. The domain chief made a grabbing gesture with his hand, and the entire relic was uprooted, creating a series of thundering noises. The onlookers were stunned to see the domain chief attempting to move the relic away in one piece. The whole site slowly rose into the air like a castle. It was encased in the form of fearsome energy. The power of the casket was contained and did not affect the movement. "Let's go," the domain chief said. He set out right away while carrying the relic. The clan leader of the Nanhai family looked down at Nanhai Qinxue and Muyunlan. "Come up." "Yes." They joined him and left together. The master cultivators also brought their youngsters along with them. "Let's set off too." Old Ma, who had been standing by the side quietly, finally spoke to Yi Futian and the others. Duan Tianxiong was right next to Old Ma. He nodded slightly at Yi Futian and joined them as well. Everyone from the top forces left the scene before long. Many cultivators who had no one to bring them along with could only lament the lack of chance to even go near the divine relic. People of Four Corner Village were traveling together with cultivators from the ancient royal family of Duan. Yi Futian asked Duan Tianxiong, "Your Majesty, have you heard about Xinjia the Great Emperor before?" "Only a little," Duan Tianxiong nodded and replied. He didn't believe in the heavenly path and challenged the gods. The supreme cultivators in early ancient times were often determined to compete against heaven since they had reached the pinnacle of cultivation. Xinjia the Great Emperor was one of them. Nevertheless, even I couldn't imagine that kind of ultimate power. We don't have people like that anymore. Yi Futian was deeply moved by the story. Cultivation had no limit. But did it mean that a cultivator had to take on the gods when he reached the peak? To challenge the heavenly path? Even Duan Tianxiong could hardly imagine a spirit like that. How would the contemporary great emperor compare with the great emperors in ancient times? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The Shangqing continent was definitely the key area in the Shangqing domain. It was visible from afar away. The Shangqing continent was definitely the key area in the Shangqing domain. It was visible from afar away. Yi Futian and the others initially planned to head straight to the Shangqing continent. However, they had to take a detour because of what happened in the Zhongyuan continent. Now that the situation was resolved, they followed other cultivators and marched to their original destination through the infinite space. Soon, they arrived at Qing City, which was the capital of the Shangqing continent. Qing City was a hotspot for cultivators of different forces from every corner of the domain. The domain chief's manor had sent the invitation to all the groups, and they welcomed visitors and representatives with open arms. Rumor had it that the domain chief's manor summoned everyone this time because critical changes were happening within the divine prefecture and war might break out. A lot of people were desperate to know who the divine prefecture would be fighting. What kind of a disastrous calamity would it be if the entire divine prefecture was engaged in war? Countless people gathered in a remote area and gazed at the domain chief's manor, which was the most powerful cultivation group in the entire Shangqing domain. It was a wonderland for many cultivators who longed to join the domain chief's manor and cultivate there. At this moment, The crowd suddenly felt a burst of intense energy coming from the sky. A distant booming sound froze everyone in their tracks. Their hearts trembled with fear. Who on earth was coming? How could someone stir up such a storm? The cultivators inside the domain chief's manor certainly sensed the disturbance as well. One after another, they sprang up and took to the air, gazing at the sky far away. At once, they saw a shocking and thrilling scene. A group of people came into sight in the sky. In the meantime, however, there was also a grand building moving along their side. It seemed that an entire piece of land was uprooted and brought here. It's the domain chief. Everyone in the domain chief's manor was amazed and electrified. What is happening? Did the domain chief move a whole city here? None of the cultivators understood what was going on. Moments later, they saw that the domain chief slammed the floating city down from the sky. With a rumbling noise, the imposing structure landed on the vacant lot outside of the domain chief's manor, which happened to be large enough to accommodate it. What? The cultivators in the domain chief's manor immediately sprinted out toward the lot. They were eager to check out the mysterious structure. The spectators outside of the domain chief's manor were also filled with curiosity and desired to look. Send people to guard the area. No one is allowed to lay eyes on the thing inside the divine casket. I hereby proclaim a strict ban on approaching the area for cultivators of the domain chief's manor. Anyone who violated the ban would lose his vision or even life. The outside cultivators are also prohibited from looking at the divine casket. The trespassers will face the consequence themselves, a firm and solemn voice rang out. Everyone was astounded and perplexed at the same time. A divine casket. What was inside? Moreover, the domain chief warned that anyone who took a look would lose their vision or even be killed. How horrifying! That being said, the domain chief's injunction only made people burning with curiosity. What could be inside? Why did he prohibit people from approaching it? Domain chief, what is that? One of the cultivators from the domain chief's manor asked directly. The sacred remains. The domain chief gave a straightforward answer. The event that occurred in the Zhongyuan continent would be made public in less than no time. He might as well tell the truth now. The sacred remains. The domain chief brought back the sacred remains. Every cultivator, both inside and outside the domain chief's manor, was astonished by the answer. They were even more intrigued now. However, they were deterred by the domain chief's warning and didn't dare to act recklessly. Only now did the crowd notice the cultivators following the domain chief. Everyone behind the domain chief seemed intimidating and unapproachable. They probably were mighty figures who came back to the manor along with the domain chief. I will send someone to inform to the Donghuang Imperial Palace as soon as I return to the domain chief's manor. Would you like to stay for a few days in the domain chief's manor to get some rest? The domain chief said to the people behind him. They darted a glance at the divine casket below. The clan leader of the Nanhai family answered on their behalf. There is no need to trouble you. We will stay in town, waiting for your order. We can go to the domain chief's manor whenever you need. Besides, they were allowed to check out the divine casket at any time anyway. All right, the domain chief nodded and said, in that case, I will not take up more of your time. Please suit yourselves. I will invite you over in a few days when the Donghuang Imperial Palace enlightens me as far as the next step. Everyone nodded their consent. They took another look at the divine casket and left separately. Let's go too, Old Ma said to Yi Futian and the others. They left with the cultivators from the ancient royal family of Duan and found an inn in the city to stay in. After the domain chief and other master cultivators left, the news about the divine casket and the sacred remains of Shunjia the great emperor swept across the capital of the Shangqing continent. Astonished and intrigued, a large number of people flocked to the area outside of the domain chief's manor, eager to have a look. The domain chief's warning also spread widely. It was said that even the domain chief and other master cultivators couldn't look directly at the sacred remains when they were back in the Zhongyuan continent. Average Renowangs would suffer a gruesome death even if they only sneaked a peek. Even so, the more grisly the rumor became, the more people gathered outside of the domain chief's manor. After he settled down in the inn, Yi Futian couldn't concentrate on cultivation. His mind was still occupied by the sacred remains of Shunjia, the great emperor, in the divine casket. At this point, Duan Qiong happened to come to look for him. He said, "Brother Yi." Yi Futian stopped cultivating and turned his eyes to Duan Qiong. Duan Qiong asked, "Are you able to focus?" Yi Futian smiled and shook his head. He couldn't concentrate. "Earlier today, you saw the sacred remains of Shunjia, the great emperor, in the divine casket, right? If not for what happened after that, perhaps you could have cultivated with it for a while longer and might have even learned or discovered something. But we probably don't have a chance now since the domain chief has taken the divine casket away. He will likely submit the sacred remains of Shunjia, the great emperor, to the Donghuang imperial palace before long." Of course, Yi Futian understood it as well. It was disappointing to miss the rare opportunity. He might be able to make considerable progress if he could really study the body of Shunjia, the great emperor. Duan Qiong noticed Yi Futian's expression and said with a smile, "Let's go. People are gathering outside of the domain chief's manor. I even heard some people in the inn talking about it. We should check it out too. Maybe you can have more time with the sacred remains and comprehend something." "Good," Yi Futian nodded and answered at once. He was not thrilled that the domain chief seized hold of the divine casket. But he didn't have enough power to challenge him. The master cultivators swarmed to the relic and dominated the situation. Even Muyunlan was a nobody in front of them, let alone Yi Futian. Those mighty figures didn't even notice their existence. Yi Futian had no choice but to watch the divine casket being taken away. The opportunity slipped through his fingers. Not only were Duan Qiong and Yi Futian of the same mind, but Blind Tai and the others also came to join them. Soon, they returned to the area outside of the domain chief's manor. The neighborhood looked completely different now. Countless cultivators thronged the streets. The crowd made an awful din. A lot of powerful cultivators were guarding the divine casket. An arrogant Renhuang, who rebelled against the warning, was blinded after one brief look in the casket. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 2162, Archenemy. Chapter 2162, Archenemy. Although the domain chief issued a ban, he also said that outsiders who disregarded his warning and insisted on examining the divine casket would suffer the consequences. Therefore, the guards sent by the domain chief's manor would only put people on notice. If someone really attempted to break through the barrier, they wouldn't stop the interloper by force. As a result, the Renhuang, who was quite famous in Qing City, became the first sacrifice. Stumbling through the crowd, he was still bleeding from his eyes and shrieking in agony. However, what happened to this Renhuang served as a cautionary tale for everyone else. The domain chief was not exaggerating to scare people. Whatever was inside the divine casket could blind people in an instant. Countless cultivators gathered outside of the domain chief's manor. Both the ground and midair were seething with people. They were all tempted to take a look, but few had the courage and confidence. At this moment, a person walked in long strides toward the space above the divine casket. Many people noticed him and were impressed by his dignified manner. He certainly was not an ordinary man. A beautiful woman behind him reminded him, "Be careful. He is going to give it a try." The crowd watched him with bated breath. This cultivator stepped forward to check out the divine casket. "That's Nanhai Qianxue, the precious daughter of the Nanhai family. The man is her husband, Muyunlan," someone in the crowd said loudly. The spectators made a loud din. Muyunlan, the renowned genius from the Nanhai continent, also came to inspect the divine casket. Yi Futian, who was also standing in the crowd, focused his eyes on Muyunlan. It seemed to him that Muyunlan felt bitter about his failed attempt in the Zhongyuan continent. He was eager to have another try after they arrived at the Shangqing continent. Muyunlan was disgruntled and resentful indeed. Back on the Zhongyuan continent, he couldn't move forward at all despite his burning desire to take a look at the inside of the divine casket. He kept asking Yi Futian what was inside, but Yi Futian never responded. Muyunlan felt deeply humiliated in that circumstance. His father-in-law and other master cultivators arrived shortly after that. Even with their tremendous power, They couldn't look directly at the sacred remains in the divine casket. Now, Muyunlan was more eager to see how terrifying the sacred remains truly were and why most people couldn't take a brief look. Muyunlan was fully prepared this time. On top of that, he planned to look down at the divine casket from above, so he wouldn't be repelled by the potent force again. His body was illuminated and shielded by the brilliant divine light of the great path, and his eyes glowed with a golden radiance. He kept moving forward and reached the sky above the divine casket. With one glance at the divine casket, he seemed to see endless runes of the great path instead of a dead man's body. Those runes of the great path immediately blasted into his eyes. The ancient characters bludgeoned the way through his defense and stabbed at his eyes in a split second. No matter how strong a cultivator might be, the eyes were always the vulnerable spots. Although Muyunlan was mentally prepared, he had to hurry to close his eyes. He stumbled several steps back, his body shaking violently. The onlookers saw him covering his eyes with both hands. Blood seeped through his fingers and streamed down his cheeks. Many people were struck dumb by the scene. The crowd stood in shocked silence, watching Muyunlan's suffering in midair. Even a forceful cultivator like him was wounded so badly that he was bleeding from his eyes. People could only guess what the sacred remains could do to an average man. Muyunlan would lose his vision if he tried again. The magnitude of the danger was beyond anyone's imagination. What on earth did Muyunlan see? No one dared to take a look at something right in front of them. It also sounded ridiculous. Nanhai Qianxue ran to check on Muyunlan. Muyunlan removed his hands and shook his head at her. He said, "I'm all right." Despite what he said to comfort his wife, he could still feel the sharp pain in his eyes and would never forget the amount of power contained in each rune. "Don't look at it again," Nanhai Qianxue said in a soft voice. Although she was rather intrigued, she curbed her curiosity and didn't try it herself. "Yes," Muyunlan nodded and replied. One glimpse was enough for him. At least he saw what was in the divine casket with his own eyes and finally let go of the obsession that had started on the Zhongyuan continent. He cast his mind back and finally understood why Yi Futian didn't answer his questions even after looking at the sacred remains several times. Yi Futian probably didn't know how to put it into words. "Muyunlan, how did it feel?" someone asked. A lot of prominent cultivators were watching Muyunlan in the front rows. They were cultivators from various top forces. A few of them stopped at the Zhongyuan continent before, but most came directly to the Shangqing continent and only learned about the sacred remains of Shunjia the Great Emperor from the elders. No matter how many years it has been since Shunjia the Great Emperor's demise, his sacred remains are not something that are to desecrated by us. We don't even get to catch a glimpse. I suppose that only a great emperor who dared to challenge the heavenly path would be able to achieve that, Muyunlan exclaimed. He had lost his usual arrogance. How could he remain to be self-satisfied when he couldn't even look at a corpse? As an 8th order Renhuang with a perfect great path, he was virtually unrivaled among his peers. Apart from several master cultivators, only a handful of cultivators in the entire Shangqing domain were in the same league as him. Nevertheless, as strong as he might be, he was a puny ant who was absolutely incomparable with Shunjia the Great Emperor. The more powerful the cultivator was, the more deeply he understood cultivation and the humbler he became. Many people were surprised by Muyunlan's remark. They noticed the abrupt change in him and felt different from what he used to be. People who were familiar with Muyunlan knew him as an extremely arrogant and proud man. Nevertheless, he couldn't help but be humbled by the sacred remains of Shunjia the Great Emperor. "I heard that someone outdid you on the Zhongyuan continent," a person said. With an indecipherable expression, Muyunlan answered, "Yes." As a matter of fact, Yi Futian was more successful than him when they both tried to break into the relic on the Zhongyuan continent. He couldn't deny it. Where did this Yi Futian come from? "I heard that he forced his way into the palace of the ancient royal family of Duan, and no one could stop him," someone asked. Duan Qiong is the most outstanding cultivator in the ancient royal family of Duan. They also have several other 9th order Renhuangs, albeit not as good as Duan Qiong. It's said that Yi Futian is only a 5th order Renhuang. Such an impressive feat is enough to make him famous throughout the Shangqing domain, Another person chimed in. These people participating in the conversation were all distinguished cultivators from different top forces. Yi Futian was a name that came up more and more often nowadays, and they even heard people in the Shangxing continent talking about him a few times. He should be here too, someone muttered while scanning the crowd, trying to find Yi Futian. Duan Qiong was not thrilled to hear these people building Yi Futian up at the expense of the ancient royal family of Duan. Nevertheless, he didn't take it to heart since he had become Yi Futian's friend. Before long, a lot of people fixed their gaze on Duan Qiong and Yi Futian. Apparently, they recognized both of them. Plenty of people were familiar with Duan Qiong. They presumed that the silver-haired man next to him was Yi Futian. He was a handsome and dashing man dressed in white with a graceful manner. Yi Futian stood in place quietly. Many people nearby spontaneously kept a respectful distance from him and Duan Qiong. The empty space around them attracted even more attention. Yi Futian was surprised that people in the capital city of the Shangxing continent would know about him. He assumed that it was because he looked at the sacred remains on the Zhongyuan continent. Rumor has it that you and Muyunlan both entered the relic on the Zhongyuan continent. You have seen the sacred remains in the divine casket too, right? Someone asked Yi Futian. Yes, I did. Yi Futian nodded and replied. Yi Futian's confirmation dispelled some people's fears. Both Yi Futian and Muyunlan had seen the sacred remains in the divine casket and only suffered minor injuries. The previous Renhuang must be blinded due to lesser strength. As scary as the sacred remains seemed to be, they were somewhat convinced that they wouldn't completely lose their sight if they gave it a try. What do you think of the sacred remains of Shenjia the Great Emperor? The same person asked again. It can't be seen. Yi Futian raised his head and answered calmly. It can't be seen? Everyone was perplexed. Yi Futian had seen it, so had Muyunlan. Why did he say it couldn't be seen? Do you mean that we can't go to look at it? Someone asked for clarification. If you ask for my opinion, I think the sacred remains can't be seen. The domain chief also reminded us and issued a ban. Yi Futian replied in a flat voice. It was not his problem how they interpreted his response. So will you go to see it again? One person asked. Yes, I will. Yi Futian nodded and said. A murmur of surprise passed through the crowd. Yi Futian told them that the sacred remains couldn't be seen. Then he confirmed that he would go to look at it again. What did he mean? Was he implying that all the other cultivators were inferior to him? The master cultivators also shifted their eyes to Yi Futian. One middle-aged man spoke loudly. What an impressive answer from the famous cultivator from Four Corner Village. You certainly live up to your reputation. Yi Futian clearly sensed a strong vibration nearby when the man was speaking. Startled, he turned around to look for the energy source. Much to his surprise, Blind Tai was facing the middle-aged man while unleashing formidable power from his body. Blind Tai had always been composed and quiet ever since Yi Futian met him. After he lost his vision, he was the blacksmith in the village for many years while cultivating his temper and spirit. Blind Tai's strong reaction prompted Yi Futian to check out the middle-aged man. Blind Tai lost both his sight and trust in people from the outer realms because he was betrayed by a friend who also stole the divine technique from him decades ago. The middle-aged man seemed to possess tremendous power. Yi Futian assumed that he was the one who blinded Blind Tai. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Yi Futian had been inquiring about Blind Tai's story in Four Corner Village. He learned which top force betrayed Blind Tai and stole the divine technique in the past. Yi Futian had been inquiring about Blind Tai's story in Four Corner Village. He learned which top force betrayed Blind Tai and stole the divine technique in the past. There was a supergroup called the Demon Cloud Clan in the lower third heavens of the Nine Heavens. The Demon Cloud Clan had a relatively short history compared to other sizable groups in the Shangxing domain. It didn't rise to power on account of a rich heritage. Instead, it was established and developed solely by one extraordinary and domineering cultivator, the Great Elder of the Demon Cloud Clan. The Great Elder of the Demon Cloud Clan had cultivated for a long time and possessed astonishing power. Although the Demon Cloud clan was based in the lower third heavens, many people believed that the great elder of the Demon Cloud clan was already in the same league as the master cultivators in the middle third heavens. On top of that, the cultivators from the Demon Cloud clan were exceptionally ambitious and forceful. As a result, the group had advanced and expanded rapidly. The current generation was led by Emoku, the eldest son of the great elder of the Demon Cloud clan. He was bestowed with outstanding natural talent and had become an intimidating cultivator. Many people believed that he might even surpass the great elder of the Demon Cloud clan and achieve more in the future. Rumor had it that the great elder of the Demon Cloud clan suddenly rose to prominence thanks to obtaining a divine item. It was also why Emoku, his eldest son, was able to make breakthroughs again and again. The son had become more successful than the father. Although he was from the lower third heavens, Emoku was one of the most noted cultivators in the Shangqing domain. He was an 8th order Renhuang with a perfect great path and was only one step away from becoming a master cultivator. If Emoku managed to advance to the 9th order, the Demon Cloud clan would spring up and become one of the most influential forces in the Shangqing domain. They might even have enough prestige to compete with the top forces in the upper third heavens. Emoku was also famous for his relationship with Blind Tai from Four Corner Village. Back in the day, they traveled through the Shangqing domain together like close brothers. Both of them were extraordinary cultivators who were well sought after. However, Emoku betrayed Blind Tai later. Not only did he steal Blind Tai's divine technique, but he also blinded and almost killed him. The news came as a bombshell at that time. Many people despised the Demon Cloud clan for their ruthless behaviors and unscrupulous means to get ahead. The groups in the upper 9 heavens also stayed away from the Demon Cloud clan. That being said, everyone had to admit that the Demon Cloud clan was growing stronger and stronger owing to their sheer brutality and wild ambition. They were probably aiming at the upper third heavens. As soon as he sensed the rage emanating from Blind Tai, Futian figured out the identity of the middle-aged man in front of him. This man must be Emoku, the eldest son of the great elder of the Demon Cloud clan and the culprit who betrayed and disabled Blind Tai. Futian raised his head to stare at Emoku and said, "I will keep studying the inside of the divine casket. If you ask me again whether the sacred remains should be seen, my answer will remain the same. It's not my business if you look at it or not. You will know once you have seen it yourself. There is no need to ask me if your mind is settled already. Look at it if you want, don't if you don't have the balls." The crowd was baffled by Futian's response. He sounded extremely arrogant, and it was hard to tell in which direction he was pushing. Should the others look at the sacred remains or not? Based on what he said to Emoku, he seemed to be goading Emoku. Emoku was not an average cultivator. Nowadays, he was a wunderkind who was almost unrivaled among his peers in the Shangqing domain. Of course, Emoku wouldn't fall into Futian's trap so easily. He slowly turned his eyes to Blind Tai and said, "It's been a long time since I saw you last." Blind Tai lifted his chin to face Emoku. Even though he couldn't see, Emoku's face had been imprinted on his mind. How could he ever forget what Emoku looked like? He calmed down a lot, surprisingly. Although he still seemed stern and hostile, he regained his composure and didn't rush to action when facing his archenemy. "I heard that you made a lot of progress after you went back to the village. I didn't go to Four Corner Village with everyone else last time because I know you don't want to see me. Nevertheless, I was still happy for you when I heard the news about you," Emoku continued. He spoke as though they were still good friends who wished each other the best. "How happy are you?" Blind Tai asked in a flat voice. It was impossible to detect his emotion from his tone. "I'm genuinely happy for you," Emoku said. "At least at one point, we were brothers who went through thick and thin together." Brothers? A mocking smile crept onto Blind Tai's face. They were good brothers indeed. He only fell for a so-called brother like Emoku because he was naive and over-trusting when he first left the village. So many years have passed. Sometimes I also feel guilty for doing you wrong and letting you down in the past. However, since Four Corner Village has rejoined the rest of the world, we can let go of the bad blood and become friends again like in the old days. The Demon Cloud clan can be an ally for Four Corner Village as well, Emoku said. So that we can be betrayed by you one more time. Blind Tai said, your strength has increased for sure. But I'm more surprised that you are even more shameless now. Emoku stared at Blind Tai in silence for a short moment. Then he shifted his attention to Futian and said, this young man from your village is much more arrogant than you when you first left the village. He is better than me, Blind Tai replied. Of course, he is far better than you too in every aspect. Blind Tai held Futian in high regard not only because of Futian's cultivation level but also for his character. Futian was far superior to Emoku and would never double-cross Blind Tai. Is that so? I'm surprised that even you would praise him with such enthusiasm. No wonder he became so famous in such a short time. The entire Shangqing domain knows of his name by now. Emoku cracked a mirthless smile and took a deep look at Futian. After that, he turned around and walked toward the divine casket. His eyes sparkled with dark and golden demonic light. It seemed as if he had a pair of frightening demonic eyes. Emoku took a few steps forward to approach the divine casket. Then he lowered his head and looked in its direction with a grave face. Although he criticized Futian for being arrogant, he was well aware of the danger posed by the sacred remains. Muyunlan was on a par with Emoku, if not better. Yet even he bled from his eyes after one peek and was convinced that the sacred remains shouldn't be desecrated. How could Emoku underestimate the power of the sacred remains? The terrifying black demonic light burst out of the demonic eyes. However, everything was annihilated when the ancient characters hit Emoku's eyes. The runes bludgeoned into his head as though he was defenseless prey. But he didn't dare to look for one more second. He protected his body with great demonic might and jumped back with all possible haste. He didn't cover his eyes as Muyunlan did. Blood streamed from the tightly closed demonic eyes. He looked like a ghastly Azura. The sacred remains couldn't be seen. Futian was not wrong. The sacred remains shouldn't be seen indeed. Anyone who attempted to look at it would suffer such an outcome. Emoku was no exception. Muyunlan and Emoku had been defeated. Two extraordinary Renwangs were wounded like this. What would happen to other average cultivators if they tried to look at the sacred remains too? No one dared to imagine. Muyunlan and Emoku were already mighty, second only to the mighty figures. Emoku's eyes recovered in a short time. He shot a glance at Futian after he opened his eyes. Let's see how you will study the divine casket, Emoku said to Futian. Everyone fixed their gaze on Futian. Futian claimed that he would look at the sacred remains in the divine casket again. What would happen to him when two of the best cultivators couldn't withstand the power of the sacred remains? Futian turned to Emoku and replied, studying the divine casket is my business. It's not a performance for your benefit. Emoku disregarded Futian's response and said, it's all the same. Of course they are not the same. I'm not interested in looking at it yet, Futian replied. He had no reason to be polite to Blind Tai's enemy. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Emoku lowered his head and stared at Futian as a formless pressure was unleashed from his body and enveloped Futian. Emoku lowered his head and stared at Futian as a formless pressure was unleashed from his body and enveloped Futian. But Futian stared right back at him without any inhibition. His deep eyes were colored with some disdain and aloofness. No matter how powerful Emoku's level of cultivation was, the things he did would not earn him any respect. Instead, they only made others despise him. An invisible storm appeared within the space. Behind Futian, Blind Tai took a step forward, and a tremendous amount of great path power surged out of him and headed straight for the space. It clashed with the authoritative pressure that Emoku had unleashed and actually transformed into this invisible storm, which created a suffocating feeling in this place. Since you do not dare to look, then do not speak so boastfully. Just then, a voice came from afar. It sounded rather cold and distant, carrying a tinge of disdain. Everyone looked at where the voice came from to see a group of elegant-looking people. They were all in white, and their aura was intense, especially the leader of the group. He was overwhelmingly valiant-looking, particularly those eyes of his. His eyes didn't seem to look like the eyes of the other people, and they exuded an otherworldly beauty. Cultivators from the palace of the illusory god, someone among the crowd muttered in a low voice. That's Bai Yen from the palace of the illusory god. In no time, the leader of the group was quickly recognized as one of the palace of the illusory god's best disciples, Bai Yen. He was a direct disciple of the current illusory god, a level 6 perfect great path cultivator. His prowess was extraordinary, and he killed without leaving any traces. One look from him was enough to kill. Palace of the illusory god. Yi Futian said this in his heart. Another enemy of Four Corner Village had appeared. When Four Corner Village was going through that change, none of the cultivators from the demon cloud nor the palace of the illusory god had appeared. These two factions of power had the deepest feud with Four Corner Village, and the divine techniques of Four Corner Village had gone to these two factions. Someone from the palace of the illusory god had once taken the eye of reincarnation from the one who was to inherit the divine techniques of Four Corner Village and put it into his own eye instead. That way, he robbed Four Corner Village of its divine techniques in this terribly cruel fashion. After Yi Futian thought about how Four Corner Village would have passed the divine techniques on, he guessed that the cultivator who got his eyes dug out by the palace of the illusory god was very likely to be connected to Duo Yu and was likely a senior related to Duo Yu by blood. That's why Duo Yu could be awakened and inherit the eye of reincarnation. If you dare, you can try it yourself, said Yi Futian very nonchalantly. Bai Yen spun around and looked toward Yi Futian. It took only an instant for Yi Futian to see a pair of terrifying eyes. A pair of eyes that could bring a person into an illusionary world. That pair of eyes seemed to be filled with divine light, which soon turned into a huge whirlpool that sucked in one's consciousness. He didn't say anything, and it took only one look at Yi Futian to bring Yi Futian into his world of eye sorcery. When everyone else saw Bai Yen turn around, as well as the divine light flowing in his gaze, they immediately understood that Bai Yen had used his eye sorcery on Yi Futian. Yi Futian's body appeared within the realm of the eye sorcery. An enormous shadow appeared near his body like a god of sorts. It held a long spear in its hand and was aiming it towards Yi Futian's body. This deity seemed impossible to fend off as it held the ultimate authority within the world of its eye sorcery. The terrifying deity brought its divine spear down as it made a stab at Yi Futian's body. In that instant, Yi Futian seemed especially minuscule. The spear of the deity came right down onto Yi Futian's body, but instead of going through Yi Futian, it was blocked from doing so. A surprised voice came out from the emptiness as the divine light around Yi Futian started flowing, and he looked into the emptiness within the illusionary realm. He said, "You wanted to try using an illusory method like eye sorcery to control my consciousness at your level of cultivation? You're not good enough." This voice resounded in the outside world as well because it had come out from Yi Futian's own mouth. Even though everyone could see that the two men were standing there without moving, they knew they had already started fighting. "Is that so?" Bai Yen said icily. The divine light in his eyes became even more terrifying as they shot straight towards Yi Futian's body. Many of them could sense an invisible force covering Yi Futian. Inside the world of the eye sorcery, Yi Futian continued standing there. A frightening windstorm started blowing towards him. It twisted and destroyed the space he was in as it threatened to swallow him as well. This was a true storm that attacked the spirit, and there was nowhere to hide in the space of the eye sorcery. That actual spiritual windstorm was like a knife that cut through the space as it hit Yi Futian's body, making him feel like he had been stabbed. But his body seemed to be protected by divine light as it stood there and looked towards the outside. Outside, Yi Futian's gaze had also become incredibly sharp as it cut through all emptiness and rushed straight into the other person's eye of reincarnation. In that instant, Bai Yen felt as if a terrifyingly sharp sword had stabbed right into his consciousness. This was eye sorcery. Yi Futian was also good at eye sorcery. Two frightening gazes collided, and a terrifying illusion appeared between their bodies. It was as if it was the image of the fight between their eye sorcery attacks. Boom! A chilly wind flew right into Bai Yan's eye, making him feel an extreme coldness that nearly stopped his thoughts from being able to move and threatened to freeze his very soul. Right there and then, Bai Yen wanted to stop using his eye sorcery, only to find that the divine light that shot out from Yi Futian's eyes had gone right into his consciousness. Within that illusion, everyone around them saw the frosty moon. They saw the incredibly gorgeous divine sword and the impossibly invincible long spear. A terrifying amount of great path divine light turned the tables as it enveloped all of Bai Yan's body within itself. Yi Futian's eyes became even more terrifying to look at, and everyone else's heart was palpitating. Was Yi Futian actually using eye sorcery to fight Bai Yan? Bai Yan's expression was clearly changing. It looked like he was struggling and wanted to get out of this fight, but the divine light had fully enveloped his body. He seemed to be completely entrenched inside and had no way of getting out. This really puzzled a lot of people. Bai Yan's best technique was eye sorcery, but the technique he was best at was now being attacked by the same thing. Worse still, he hadn't gained any advantage, and it wasn't wrong to say that he was actually losing now. How dare you use the eye sorcery technique that you stole from someone else in front of me, spat Yi Futian. He took a step forward. With a loud explosion, Bai Yan's body flew backward. His face was deathly pale, and fresh blood seeped from his eyes. My goodness, everyone felt their hearts tremble when they saw this scene. Yi Futian's eyes slowly regained normalcy, but the way he looked at Bai Yan was still filled with nothing but disdain. Bai Yan's bleeding eyes opened to stare at Yi Futian. His face was as white as a sheet. This was the greatest humiliation he had ever suffered. He had used his best technique to attack Yi Futian but had been humiliated in return. He had literally asked for it. My goodness, is he really that powerful? All the cultivators thought as they all looked at Yi Futian. They had heard some rumors about how powerful Yi Futian was, but this was the first time they had watched him fight. Even the cultivators from those highly acclaimed factions of power were surprised. Yi Futian had used eye sorcery to defeat Bai Yan, an expert in the eye sorcery. What sorcery was this? They now looked at Yi Futian more respectfully than before. Few in the Shangqing domain could compare to someone with such gifting. Even the strongest fighters from the ancient royal family of Duan had been thoroughly thrashed by him and had admitted defeat. And now, Bai Yan had been soundly defeated by eye sorcery. Yi Futian didn't look at Bai Yan anymore and just walked towards where the divine casket was. Everyone's eyes followed his movement as he walked past them. What would happen when Yi Futian looked at the ancient body lying in the divine casket? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.